Subcommittee will come to order. I would like to welcome NSF Director Dr. Franz Cordova to the subcommittee. Good morning. The National Science Foundation is an independent federal agency charged with promoting basic research and education in science and engineering. In doing so, it is a major source of federal support for U.S. university research in the STEM fields. NSF's investments in STEM education help train the next generation of scientists and engineers. As you know, Dr. Cordova, I'm a strong supporter of NSFs, and I believe that its programs help our nation to be the world leader in major discoveries, innovations, and scientific breakthroughs. The President's budget proposal for fiscal year 2020 requests $7.06 billion for NSF, which is $1.01 billion, or 12% decrease from the 2019 enacted level. Within the total, the President's budget also proposes $5.66 billion for the research and related activities account, which is a cut of $858 million, or 13.1% below the current level. These proposed levels of funding endanger the core missions at NSF. For example, if the requested amount is enacted into law, the number of competitive awards for FY 2020 would go down from 11,600 awards in 2018 to 10,400. In a given year, NSF awards grants to over 1,800 colleges, universities, and other public and private institutions in 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. Cutting funding for NSF will inevitably leave many schools without this much needed education and research funding. The President's budget blueprint for FY 2020 also requests $823.4 million in funding for the Education and Human Resources account within NSF. This represents a cut of $86.5 million, or 9.5%. The President's budget proposal would accomplish this decrease by cutting programs that increase STEM participation, including programs that help minorities. I will strongly oppose this and will work to make sure that minority-serving institutions receive robust funding for STEM research. Another issue of importance to me is the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico. The President's budget for FY 2020 proposes a total of $4.26 million for the observatory from NSF's MPS and GEO accounts, which is a reduction of $3.28 million from the FY 2019 enacted level. I strongly support the Arecibo Observatory and its mission. In short, NSF helps our economy grow, sustains our economic competitiveness, and enables us to remain the world leader in innovation. We will continue to work in a bipartisan manner to ensure that it is well funded. Thank you once again, Dr. Cordova, for joining us today. I look forward to your testimony. Now I would like to recognize my friend and ranking member, Mr. Idaho.
Thank you for your Mr. Chairman, and I just want to say that I think in light, everyone's a little disappointed to hear about your announcement yesterday, regarding your retirement. And I just want to say it's been a pleasure working with you over the years, and of course, you're a tireless advocate for not only your constituents but also for all the things that we work for on this subcommittee. And so many things on the Appropriation Committee overall. So we'll certainly miss serving alongside you in Congress, but wish you best in the next chapter of your life. Dr. Cordova, thank you for being here today, and it's an honor to have you here as to discuss the National Science Foundation FY 2020 budget. Looking at your resume, you have a commendable career, and we appreciate your service. As you well know, as much as anybody, going back to 1950, the National Science Foundation has been successfully carrying out its mission to promote American science and engineering by supporting fundamental research and STEM education. Furthermore, last year alone, the National Science Foundation funded 11,700 research awards, supported over 380,000 teachers, scientists and students, And this support is key because research spurs innovation. Innovation drives our U.S. economy and enhances our national security, allow the U.S. to make improvements technologically and to create new thriving industries, spur job growth, and make workforce more efficient. Even in times of physical restraint, this committee has remained supportive in NSF's efforts to ensure that students, scientists, and universities have the funds they need to carry out their vital research. This committee has also worked hard to ensure that NSF and, of course, all agencies under our jurisdiction are held accountable to remain exceptional stewards of the taxpayer dollars. Of course, the FY 2020 request for the NSF is what we're here going to be discussing today, and our goal today is to discuss the details of that request and gain a better understanding from you, Dr. Cordova, about the priorities for the coming year. In particular, it would be good to hear about the proposal's impact on programs like EPSCoR, NSF's investment in advanced manufacturing, artificial intelligence, quantum information science, and the ongoing Antarctic Infrastructure Modernization Science Construction Project. It will be important for this committee to understand how NSF plans to continue carrying out its mission in FY 2020 to support basic research throughout the country while having an increased focus on a group of long-term interdisciplinary research projects known as the 10 Big Ideas. So, Dr. Cordova, with that, I look forward to your testimony, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Adderholm. Dr. Cordova, you are recognized at this time. We hope you... But please understand that your full statement will be inserted in the record.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Adderholt, Congresswoman Meng, and all the members of the subcommittee and staff. It's really a pleasure to be with you today. And Chairman Serrano, let me also reiterate Mr. Adderholt's comments about your announcement yesterday. We are just so indebted to you for your service to the nation. Thank you very much. The President's FY 2020 budget request for the National Science Foundation is $7.1 billion. This request makes targeted investments in basic research within a constrained budget environment. The details of the budget request are laid out in my written testimony. However, I'd like to take the next few minutes to highlight the value our agency has brought to the nation. In 2020, the National Science Foundation will celebrate its 70th anniversary. I've been thinking about this milestone. Every day, we interact with advancements that would not be possible without the National Science Foundation. I bet one of the first things we all did today was to grab our mobile phones to read our emails, check the news, and check the weather. The touchscreen interface that we have become so accustomed to was developed by an NSF-funded scientist, as was the lithium-ion battery that powers smartphones and laptops. And that weather forecast you rely on to make decisions every day was made more accurate by Doppler radar, a product of government-funded research, including NSF. The barcodes that do everything from scan goods at the grocery store to tracking our packages as they travel across the country to getting us into airplanes, that technology was made possible by NSF-funded researchers. You might use a GPS-based app to find your way around in a new city or an alternate route home in heavy traffic. In its early days, Qualcomm relied on SBIR funding from NSF to develop technology that changed the face of wireless communications globally. Indeed, one of the wonderful things about basic research is that you never know where it might lead and who it might benefit someday. A great example is how research in economics has saved lives by transforming our system of kidney donation and transplants. Nobel Prize-winning NSF-supported scientists used research into game theory to develop software that could match kidney donors with recipients more efficiently, speeding up a process where time is precious. Sometimes basic research is criticized at first for seeming silly or wasteful or unworthy of federal resources. It's hard to imagine this today, but when linguist William Stokoe began to look at American Sign Language in the 1960s, NSF was criticized for supporting his work by those who did not appreciate sign language as a possible means of communication. However, his use of NSF funding to publish the Dictionary of American Sign Language revolutionized education for deaf individuals, improving the lives of so many. Often, discovery requires persistence in the face of incredible odds. A century after Einstein had predicted their existence, and with 40 years of NSF support, the LIGO facility detected gravitational waves produced by the collision of two black holes. In doing so, a new era of discovery in astrophysics began. This is the type of high-risk, high-reward research that NSF is uniquely charged with undertaking. From Nobel Prize-winning work for interpreting the genetic code and its function in protein synthesis, to mapping the wheat genome, to making 3D printing a reality, NSF supports the discoveries and discoverers that keep the United States a global leader in innovation. As we look towards celebrating NSF's 70th anniversary, I'm focused on positioning the agency to continue this work so that my successors may come before this body and herald the next great breakthroughs. That is why we developed NSF's 10 Big Ideas. The Big Ideas strategically focus on areas ripe for discovery, areas that will allow NSF and the nation to continue to push into the frontiers of science. With other science agencies, we're positioning our nation to continue to lead research in artificial intelligence and quantum information science. We continue to invest in large research facilities that keep the U.S. at the forefront of discovery, building the world's most powerful solar observatory in Hawaii, for example, and that observatory will see first light this summer. We're investing in supercomputers, robotics, and advanced manufacturing. We will stimulate convergence across scientific disciplines to foster the type of integrated research needed to address our most pressing needs. And perhaps most importantly, we continue to invest in people. Discoveries don't happen without discoverers. We have to continue to light the imagination of the next generation, to nurture them as they find their way to the sciences, to ensure that we are reaping the benefits of our country's diversity, to create an environment free from all types of harassment, and to support them in their academic careers. Mr. Chairman, I'd be remiss to not also thank this committee and you and your colleagues for the historic level of funding provided for NSF in fiscal year 2019. With that funding, we're making investments that keep America at the cutting edge of scientific discovery and Americans leading the world in scientific achievement. Thank you for your time today and your continued strong support of NSF and our mission. None of the advancements I've described would be possible without congressional support.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your testimony. Director Cordova, the administration's fiscal year 2020 budget request is a significant reduction of $1.1 billion below the fiscal year 2019. Can you tell us how many fewer research grants will be awarded and how many fewer graduate fellowships?
Yes, if I do the math that both you and Mr. Adderholt just mentioned, you mentioned that we would be funding about 10,400 grants this year, and he mentioned that we were funding 11,700 grants in fiscal year 18, then that's about 1,200 to 1,400 fewer grants overall with this budget. As for the graduate research fellowships, our 20 request is for funding 1,600 graduate research fellowships. In FY18, we funded 2,000.
How many?
2,000 new ones last year, and we can fund 1,600 new ones this year, so 400 less.
Significant decreases. What other reductions will your budget request, if enacted, result in?
Pardon me?
What other budget reductions will, if your budget request is enacted,
Yes.
what other reductions will take place?
Well, we, as was mentioned, the budget is reduced about 12% from levels that we had previously. And that's a reduction in just about all of our programs. I mean, some we've kept at, a few we've kept at the levels of FY18, but basically the question, the answer is that just about all of our programs will see some reductions.
For several years now, not all of the NSF programs to expand participation of groups traditionally underrepresented in science have been held flat. Your budget request cuts many of these programs. How much of the demand do these programs meet?
The programs, it's all about capacity, Chairman. If with additional investment, we can supply we can fund more programs, and more of the need is out there. Every year, we leave about $4 billion, and that's at a level of around $8 billion. We leave about $4 billion worth of good proposals on the cutting room floor, and those are proposals that are rated very good to excellent. With a recent, just as one concrete example, with a recent call for mid-scale proposals, those are proposals for instrumentation facilities in the range between a few $1 million. What we call our major research instrumentation program is below that, and the major facilities, which cost over $100 million. We received $4.7 billion in proposals just for that one opportunity from several hundred people. So there's enormous demand out there. Whatever our budget is, NSF will fund the best possible research. We have this amazing merit review process that is the gold standard, and it will judge which are the top proposals.
Yeah, and I'm concerned about that because just in your opening statement, you listed so many wonderful things that have been done, and you even listed the fact, you commented on the fact that some people might not have approved at the time and thought it was perhaps a waste of money or something, and yet it turned out to be wonderful. So we worry that these cuts are really harming our future. And look, I know that budgets are tight at times, but there are certain areas that should not take heavy cuts because they make life better for all of us and keep our country where it should be. Let me ask you, what are the major gaps in participation that NSF does not have programs to address? Are there areas missing still?
When I came to NSF now 5 years ago, I was very concerned about broadening participation, and I looked carefully into NSF's programs for that. We do spend a lot of money on broadening participation. That's part of our mission, to encourage people of all ages to have access to STEM education, and young people in particular to want to become scientists and engineers and supply the next generation with the kinds of discoveries I talked about. I was concerned that we're still not moving the needle. We still have a large untapped groups of people, of women and minorities, and that either don't have access or encouragement in science and engineering. And so I looked at the programs we do, and asking the question, are there some that we should stop doing? Should we change up the way we're doing things? And I found that the programs that we are invested in that are doing broadening participation are very good programs. They are excellent programs in different parts of the country with different kinds of missions. Some are directed towards students and provide them scholarships and all. One great example is the Hostas Community College program in the Bronx that you know about, and that's such an important program to get students the capacity, the knowledge to then go on to a four-year program like the Grove School of Engineering there at CUNY. But we still had gaps in that, and we still really need to move the needle on participation of everybody. And so we started the Includes program. The Includes program is one of our big ideas, and it is funding programs, 70 or more now, all across the United States in different areas. And the whole goal of it is to increase the representation of women and minorities in particular in STEM education. And this program now is really a network of networks. We have the different pilot programs grouped into alliances around the country, and now we have a backbone organization that's run by SRI, and they are doing evaluation and assessments of the programs, and they're networking all the investigators together because, Chairman, the basic challenge is how do you scale really good ideas? How do you make them scalable so that the whole country can understand that these are good models to replicate? And that's what the Includes program is really trying to do that hasn't been done so much before.
Thank you. Let me just touch on one subject area before I turn it, one further subject area before I turn it over to the ranking member. The Arecibo Observatory is the second largest single-dish radio wavelength reflector and has been in service since 1963. Although multiple agencies perform research at the Arecibo Observatory, NSF's Division of Astronomical Sciences has the long-standing responsibility for basic site maintenance and upkeep. We provided $16 million in disaster relief funding to repair and upgrade this facility because of Hurricane Maria. Can you give us an update on the status of the repairs at the observatory?
Yes, and in fact, I'm going to Puerto Rico next week just to see how they're doing there and to check in on the observatory and also to talk with universities like the University of Puerto Rico and its campuses. I actually have used Arecibo in the past. I am an astrophysicist. This is my line of work in research. We spent about $2 million of that $60 million to date, starting on the repairs. We've asked OMB and Congress to approve a 5-year spend plan so that we could do in an orderly fashion address everything that we needed to address in terms of repairs and modest upgrades to this facility. So we very much appreciate that much needed money for the upgrades. It's just an outstanding facility that has made amazing discoveries, including Nobel Prize-winning discoveries.
And with that in mind, over many decades, the Arecibo Observatory has produced invaluable scientific research and discoveries. That is why I believe that the federal government should maintain ownership of this facility, even if it is administered and run by an educational institution or a private party. Will you commit to not transfer the title of the observatory to a private party?
We have no plans to transfer the title in fiscal years 19 and 20. I think you know that the whole discussion about title transfer was something that was surfaced by the management entity, the University of Central Florida, that has been of interest to them, but we have no plans to do that in the next fiscal years. We're hopeful that in the next 2 fiscal years, we're hopeful that the University of Central Florida will engage other partners, as they have committed to do, to be a part of funding the Arecibo Observatory. We know that NASA has upped its commitment to $4.65 million. And we've also given a grant to Brigham Young University to build a receiver that costs on the order of $5 million, a new receiver that will open up new capabilities for the observatory. And so we're continuing to fund assets that will help the university.
You'll note that
Observatory.
you'll know that the answer is, while I'm still in Congress, it's okay. So you guys get ready, all right? No, I think we have a lot of friends who support the observatory. Mr. Adderhold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Traditionally, Dr. Cordova, the distribution of NSF research dollars has not been uniform across the country, but the established program to stimulate competitive research, commonly known as EPSCoR, helps to address this problem. Of course, EPSCoR promotes scientific progress nationwide by strengthening research capacity and competitiveness at universities in particular states. Last year alone, Alabama received over $14 million through EPSCoR to stimulate competitive research. Unfortunately, in the FY2020 request, EPSCoR is reduced by $24 million from the FY19 enacted level. The last time the EPSCoR was funded at a similar level was back in FY2012. Just wanted to get your opinion of what the rationale would be in reducing this important program.
The EPSCoR program is an extremely important program, and I've been to many EPSCoR states. I actually live in an EPSCoR state. New Mexico is my home. And I've been able to see firsthand the amazing things that are being done to raise capacity, research infrastructure, and research itself in the EPSCoR states. The EPSCoR funding is formulaic. It is by congressional design. And so when our budget goes up, the EPSCoR funding goes up in line with, it's like an index fund. It goes up with our total budget. And when it goes down according to the formula. So it is exactly the amount that we proposed in 2020 is according to the formula as set out by Congress.
What but at this level, what would be the impact on states like Alabama that, have a lot of institutions that rely on these funds to build the capacity they need to compete nationally?
The need for investment, research investment is great in EPSCoR states. It's great throughout the country. All the things that we've talked about. It's just, as I said earlier, a matter of capacity. With increased investment, we can fund more, but whatever investment we have, we will always use it very wisely. We will fund the very best possible research, and that includes in Alabama.
Of course, manufacturing is a key industry in Alabama and, of course, in many states. I'm very supportive of any efforts that create additional jobs and opportunities for our manufacturers throughout the country. I was pleased to see that the FY 2020 request includes $268 million to revitalize American manufacturing. Can you take a moment just to explain how this research investment will help the manufacturing industry grow and flourish, and also but how it could potentially help our American manufacturers to be more competitive with foreign entities?
Yes. Well, this is, of course, a priority of the administration, and it's been a priority of the National Science Foundation for a long time. We have no fewer than 4 of our directorates are involved in funding programs in advanced manufacturing, which, as you know, is a very broad topic. Our computing and information science and engineering directorate, our biology directorate, our math and physical sciences directorate, and of course our engineering directorate all fund programs in advanced manufacturing. And this is everything to do with the smart workforce of the future. One of our big ideas that, and you mentioned those, Mr. Adderholt, in your remarks, is called the future of work at the human technology frontier. And in order to fund the best possible research that will impact what the future of work looks like, we're going to have smarter machines and smarter approaches in order to help the worker. And so I've been able to see the progress of this big idea and the kinds of investments we're making, and I've seen some recent examples that have to do with the factory floor and enabling individuals to have additive manufacturing and things like virtual reality and robotics to assist them in doing jobs that they couldn't possibly do all by themselves. It's really very inspiring to see the kinds of work that we're funding in advanced manufacturing.
How do you, or how will you ensure that all areas of the country benefit from these investments in the manufacturing sector research?
We, the same way we do with all of our programs, our calls for proposals are open to the entire country, and we have an emphasis on advanced manufacturing. We have an emphasis on the American worker. I am a member of the President's Special Committee or Council on the American worker, and there our main subject is skilling and reskilling of the American workforce, and that has to do with, for NSF, there are two main programs where we do that. One is our Advanced Technological Education Program, which is in many, many community colleges throughout the country. And there, all people are welcome to take courses in learning all sorts of technology occupations. I visited some of those sites, and it's absolutely amazing the kinds of projects that are going on in our community colleges, the equipment that they have to train people, and the quality of their faculty to teach them. So that's one of our programs, and we keep putting, with the graciousness of Congress, more money into the Advanced Technological Education Program. And then we have a number of other programs. For example, our Convergence Accelerator that we're just now starting. We put out the first call for the accelerator projects last week. And these are all projects that welcome everyone from around the country to conceive ideas to accelerate research in three main areas. One of those is in big data, but the other two are in reskilling and upskilling the workforce and matching the workers to the work. And so we're very excited about seeing the results of those, and we think that that is going to be a big push. And the proposals we're asking for on a short time scale, and we're hopeful that they will achieve outcomes within the next couple of years. We think this could be a real game changer.
Thank you, Ms. Chairman.
Thank you. We will now begin our first round for members, adhering to the 5-minute rule. Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our distinguished witness for being here today. I want to start by talking about a 2018 New York Times article by Dr. Maria Zuber, the former chair of the National Science Board and vice president for research at MIT. She expressed deep concern about our nation failing to make necessary investments in research and graduate education and training to produce the knowledge and workforce that we need to compete with the investments being made by China and other nations. Dr. Zuber explained that China's spending on research and development has grown by an average of 18% every year, while the U.S.'s spending grew just by 4%. Potential consequence of this funding disparity, among others, is that China now claims more than 200 of the fastest supercomputers, while the United States has fewer than 150. Dr. Zuber concluded, quote, "We cannot continue to advance the frontiers of knowledge and lead the world in innovation without funding for students and equipment, and when the only long-term federal commitment is to fiscal uncertainty," unquote. Even President Trump is quoted as saying in the U.S. National Security Strategy report that, quote, "Losing our innovation and technological edge would have far-reaching negative implications for American prosperity and power." My first question for you is, what is the consequence of an inability to compete with China and other nations when it comes to science and technology? In layman's terms, what happens to the U.S. if we don't have a robust science and technology workforce?
We clearly need a robust science and technology workforce, and this is a competitive world in which things are changing very rapidly, Mr. Cartwright. And that's why NSF cares so very much about its investment in the best possible research. That's one of the reasons that we stepped up with a new strategy called NSF's 10 Big Ideas. They are addressed towards what are the pressing needs of the country, whether it's in quantum information science or artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing, and 5G. Clearly broadening participation in STEM education. There are many, many needs of our country, and we have to be competitive in all of those. And so we will do our part. I am a member, or actually I co-chair 3 of the 6 committees of the National Science and Technology Council that is really moving ahead as part of the administration and all the executive branch agencies to do our best to be competitive.
Well, I think it is obvious that NSF recognizes that its funding supports research that is a primary driver of economic growth in this country. According to Nobel Prize winner and MIT economics professor Robert Solow, since World War II, half of American economic growth can be traced to advances in science and technology. Our investments in NSF will produce real family-sustaining jobs. Question is, how do you explain how NSF funding drives economic growth?
The NSF funding is mainly about funding fundamental research that's at the basis of technology and innovation. Without making the fundamental discoveries, you then can't go to application and outcomes. I mentioned in my open remarks several examples of where fundamental research in whether it's communications or any form of research, physics, chemistry, materials, has led to amazing technology. And one example I gave had to do with our cell phones and our laptop computers. All of the, sure, Apple put them all together, but it had to have the ingredients, and we make the ingredients. There are several technologies that are involved, for example, in cell phones, and every single one of them, when you look at them in detail, was first funded by a government agency, and several of them by the National Science Foundation. So if we lose our pressing, if we don't press on doing the fundamental research, then we will have nothing left to invent applications and to put things together and create the technologies of the future. When I just go into a hospital, I just marvel because I know that NSF research was at the foundation of so much the equipment that is used on me as I'm examined and people try to understand better, predict what various things that I have, what's going to be their outcomes. It's because of fundamental research that we have the equipment that we do in hospitals, in our cars, in airplanes, and so forth.
Well, my last question then is, with this kind of gargantuan return on investment in NSF funding, why would anyone in the world want to cut NSF funding, given that its funding drives our economy, enhances our national security, and advances this nation's leadership globally?
We're grateful to Congress for giving us an historic budget for fiscal year 19 of $8.1 billion. I can thank you for that.
Well, this fiscal year 2020 budget proposal for NSF puts the agency back to where it was in FY 2012. That doesn't sound like much of an investment in the future. We have to invest in the future in areas like, as you mentioned, artificial intelligence and quantum computing. This committee has made it clear year after year that we do not support draconian cuts in the NSF budget, despite this administration proposal. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Cordova, thank you for being here today. It's good to see you again. I think last time we had you at our hearing was in 2017. Well, shame we didn't have a chance to hear from you last year. I want to speak with you today about STEM management, particularly those programs geared towards women and the underserved communities. My time serving as chairman of the Space Subcommittee taught me the importance of STEM programs, and the President's budget proposal reduces the funds available for you to engage women and minorities. So my question is, how are you planning to provide opportunities for those interested in STEM fields? Can you discuss how this budget request affects programs like the PBS program, Sci Girls, and the Computer Science for All program? And third, has the advanced program increased women's participation in science and engineering fields, and anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, well, thank you very much for those questions. As you can imagine, those are close to my heart. And so I was a young girl once that wanted to be a scientist, and I didn't have the encouragement from family or teachers to be so, because the vision of what a scientist was looked very different than me. In fact, I think when I was NASA's chief scientist, my first day in the office, a senior official came in to me, and he said jokingly, but he said, you don't look like a chief scientist, because we have these conceptions. And so that's something that we really want to change, is that, and through programs like you mentioned a couple, Sci Girls, which is on television in a lot of places, and the advanced program, we're trying to make an impact on that. And through other things like our sexual harassment moves to reduce harassment, which can be a barrier to advancement for women and to participation and engagement. So at Purdue University, when I came in as president, we were just submitting the proposal for the advanced program, our first, and I was the principal investigator for that. So for almost the whole time I was there, I led that program at Purdue University. And there, our special effort was to advance, in particular, minority women, Hispanics, and African-American women through the professoriate. And so I know, because I've been there firsthand, that these programs really can make a difference. My inspiration, if you were to ask me how being a young person without a family and teachers that were motivating, it was from just a program very much like Sci Girls. It was a program on television. This one happened to be about neutron stars. That also convinced me to become an astrophysicist. But these informal education programs, as well as the more formal programs like the advanced program, which insists on institutional commitment to really rectify a situation and make it possible for those pathways to be open to women, are just so very important. So I'm really proud that NSF has a diversity of programs. With the diversity of ages for entering into the programs. It hits young girls, middle school girls, and it hits women in the professoriate.
Well, thank you, Director Cordova. I yield back.
Thank you, Director, for being here today, and Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member for holding this meeting. I want to echo the concerns that have been mentioned by the Chairman, by Mr. Palazzo, about encouraging building a STEM workforce, especially for those from minority communities. I know we've talked about cuts of funding to programs like historically black colleges and universities, undergraduate program, tribal colleges, and universities program, for example. Wanted to specifically ask, I know you talked about your work at Purdue for African American and Latino women, but wanted to know about Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institutions. This program provides grants and other forms of assistance to institutions to expand their capacity to serve this community. I noticed that NSF's budget does not have dedicated funding streams for these institutions. Can you explain how NSF currently funds these institutions and reaches out to the API community?
We have, our programs are open to all, and we have a relatively new program over the last few years called Includes, and that has programs. There's about 75 programs all over the country, and some of them have that particular goal. They can have all sorts of goals of broadening participation. And the whole idea there is that they are networked into each other so they can share best practices, and so the whole efforts of broadening participation can scale up. So that's one way that we do it. And we have many programs like Computer Science for All, our Discovery Research for pre-K through 12 programs, our REU programs, our graduate research programs for graduate fellows, all of which welcome the populations that you're talking about. Even though we don't have a specific program, we do have programs where we welcome the diversity of the population to join them.
Wonderful. If we can ever collaborate in any way, especially in my home state of New York, please feel free to let me know. Wanted to talk about a field that you mentioned, quantum information science, which is a whole new field. There is a race in this field to develop and retain talent. We can have the best plans and long-term strategy for quantum research, but if we don't grow this talent in our country, we will be left behind. I'm told by industrial researchers that you cannot just take engineers or physicists and teach them quantum engineering, that it's a whole separate and new field. What is the administration doing to develop the workforce necessary to meet our industry needs for quantum-trained talent? I know that some applications may be several years away, so how can we retain the talent we developed? And can the NSF DOE centers that were authorized in HR 6227 help develop this talent needed?
The answer to all those questions is yes. There is a very vigorous effort on the part of this administration to step up our efforts and investment in quantum research. And even a few years ago, NSF stepped up with one of its 10 big ideas is called the Next Quantum Leap. And so we have been funding at NSF quantum sciences, quantum research for decades. And in fact, 31 of the Nobel Prize winners that we funded have won it for specific quantum inventions, discoveries. We are a part of the group in the National Science and Technology Council that worked with the White House to put together a strategic plan under OSTP's leadership for quantum information science, and that plan was put out just a short while ago. That plan also calls for, and the congressional language, because Congress, of course, passed their quantum initiative, which is just great, and it called for OSTP to lead in an effort to really get us to the next level. And so there is a group that has been formed in OSTP under Josh Taylor's leadership, and NSF has contributed members to that, as have other agencies. So this is really top of mind for all of us agencies working together. Quantum, and as for young people, part of the Quantum Strategic Plan actually specifically addresses raising a quantum workforce, and what's needed is investments at a very young age to, just as we're trying to get all students to think more computationally and to be computer literate, we also want them to be quantum literate. And there are those professors in our universities and faculty in many places who believe that very young people can learn quantum principles. And quantum physics was one of my favorite subjects as in graduate school. And just like anything else, like calculus, if you learn it at an early age, it's new enough and different enough. It's like learning another language, and it's actually quite fun to put yourself in that space. And there are those of us who really believe that you can learn the principles of quantum science and computer science, which are inextricably linked through quantum information science at a very young age.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. On February 27th, I introduced a resolution, HR 153, to encourage the ethical development of AI. How do you plan on incorporating ethical and social studies into the AI research NSF supports?
Thank you, Mrs. Lawrence, Congresswoman Lawrence, for your leadership on this. Having an ethical framework for artificial intelligence is extremely important. As you know, artificial intelligence is a very broad collection of approaches, and it has promises all sorts of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges. So what NSF is doing to help provide leadership in this area, and it's leadership that is frankly a coincidence with the administration's plan to be, for this country to be a leadership, to be a leader in artificial intelligence, is to fund some specific proposals that have to do with ethics and bias and fairness and transparency and accountability and explainability in artificial intelligence. We released just a short while ago, a few months ago, a call for proposals from our Computer and Information Science and Engineering branch, and working with our Social and Behavioral and Economic Science branch, and an entity called the Partnerships for Artificial Intelligence, which is a collection of about 50 industries and foundations and nonprofit organizations. And so all of us are working together to request proposals from the community at large that deal with these very important subjects. In addition, our computer science branch is working with Amazon and we just signed a memorandum of agreement to develop proposals and fund research on fairness in artificial intelligence. So I think we're fast becoming a real leader in this area, and it's just incredibly important that at the outset of doing new research that you also incorporate things like bias and fairness and accountability and transparency. So I'm really glad we're in this vein, that we're pursuing this.
How is NSF prioritizing research funding to address safety problems? Specifically, there are particular AI safety research questions you hope to address in the future research, such as about reducing unsafe exportation by AI systems. What is your feeling on the safety?
Well, safety is incredibly important, and the programs that I just mentioned will also be welcoming, or the programs that I mentioned will be welcoming proposals in this area. Safety is an extremely important part of all research, and particularly in artificial intelligence. So one of our 10 big ideas is on the future of work at the human technology frontier, and this is about machine learning and robotics, artificial intelligence in general, helping the worker to have a safer work environment and to augment human capabilities so that we leave individuals free to work in a healthy, safe environment to do the creative things. And the robots and machines are doing the things that are more dangerous, that are heavier, and et cetera. So safety is all part and parcel of the basic research that we do.
My last question. You are saying all of the right things when it comes to STEM, when it comes to inclusion of women and minorities. However, how do you monitor success? Have you set internal goals that says that we want to have what percentage of impact of improvement? Who monitors that? And my concern is that, and I've seen it where someone will talk about a wonderful plan, but no one monitors it and there are no specific goals. What are your goals as related to increasing those in the workplace?
Congresswoman Lawrence, I'm a person who's not fond of saying that was a great question, but I will say it this time, that's a great question. So I too was very concerned when I first came to NSF now 5 years ago about evaluation and assessment of our programs. And we've been funding through our merit review process, which is an amazing process that identifies great research. We've been funding spectacular work, but how do we assess and evaluate it? And how do we then transfer that knowledge to others so that they can replicate it and so that it's scalable and so everybody can take advantage of what we just invested in? And so we are changing things up. In our Includes program, which is one of our 10 big ideas, is a great example of that. In the Includes program, we insist as part of the proposals that people have identified what are their goals and what are their metrics to achieve those goals. And then we hired a backbone organization, which is SRI. They're our first backbone organization, which is charged with coming up with those, making sure that those are done, and then coming up with overall evaluation and assessment schemes so that we can stand before a body like this one and say that for that program, here's what we set out to achieve, here's what we did achieve, this is why it's important, and this is what's replicable about it, and this is how we would scale it. So I couldn't agree more, and that goes way beyond any specific program. That has to do with all of our programs. We do have an evaluation and assessment office. It's within our Office of Integrative Activities, and they are charged with doing evaluation and assessment of specific programs. But we haven't yet achieved a goal that I would like us to achieve, is that every single program, whether it's Includes program or anything, has built within it a framework for metrics in evaluation. So you've hit on something that is very close to me, and I would really, I'm committed to seeing that idea furthered. Yeah.
In other words, that was a great question.
Yeah.
Mr. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Cordova, for being with us today. I appreciate that the National Science Foundation is working to tackle issues of scientific and societal importance through the 10 big ideas. However, there are a lot of other societal issues important to my district, like harmful algae blooms, climate change, and civil rights, that are not included in the big ideas. Considering that the agency's budget proposes a top-line cut of almost 12%, while also investing more money in the Big Ten, what are your what are you going to do to make sure that the NSF continues to support research to address issues that are not included in the big ideas?
Well, that's a great question, too,
Thank you.
because I come from a Big Ten institution, Purdue University.
You're a Boilermaker.
And as you know, there are more than 10 members of that. So there will be more than 10 members of the big ideas pretty shortly. One of the big ideas is called NSF 2026. And it's called 2026 because the year 2026 will be the 250th birthday of our country. And we thought it would be great to have a whole suite of new big ideas ready for investment by that time. So we set on that goal. But we put out a call last summer for new big ideas. And to everybody in the nation, everybody that's greater than 14 years old, because for some legal reasons you can't be younger than 14 and apply for that kind of, because it comes with a prize, a monetary prize. And so we have all those proposals in as of the end of October, and they're being evaluated. There are many, many hundreds of those proposals. They're being evaluated internally right now, and we expect to make an announcement on the winners, which will also be asked some subset of them to produce videos and all. We want to make it a very public thing that the public has had this opportunity to suggest big ideas that are appropriate, fundable for the National Science Foundation. So we intend to have a big splash on that. On your more specific mention of things like algal blooms. These are incredibly important to the National Science Foundation also, and we have other programs like our RAPIDS programs. RAPID is an acronym, but what it really means is that if you're interested in something that just happened, a disaster, a tornado, an earthquake, hurricanes, algal blooms, you can, infectious disease, you can propose to attack that problem immediately, and you don't have to wait 6 months to be funded. You can be funded within just a few weeks' time. And so that's called our RAPIDS program initiative. We also have one of our big ideas is called Navigating the New Arctic. And that, of course, there are algal blooms in the Arctic going on as well. And so that's another opportunity.
Thank you. The RAPIDS program you mentioned, I'm curious, what is the level of funding that's available there presently?
I would have to get back to you on that. I don't know specifically what the level of funding is. But the unique thing about that program, Congressman Christ, is that I can't say it's infinite because it's not, but it's very open-ended because any program officer, because they all have the capacity, the wherewithal to fund RAPIDS program, and they make those decisions internally because they have to be made very quickly. Once in a while, if they really don't understand the science, then they can go out and get a quick assessment of it. But most of those, because of the urgency, are made internally, and they can be made by any of the different directorates. And so it's, we don't, to my knowledge, but I will get back to you with the details, we don't have a specific budget because one year we can have a Zika or an Ebola crisis or a host of natural disasters and hurricanes, and the next year perhaps not so many. And so it would ebb and flow with the amount of proposals and the quality of the proposals that we get in to do them.
How does that work? I mean, you can just put more money in it when bad things happen, or
Well,
reduce money when they don't?
No, we have, people have some flexibility for, within their budgets to fund. I mean, it's all about what is the level of funding being proposed. Most of the RAPIDS proposals are, and again, it's about the details, are on the order that a small team of people wants to go and be ready for, in the case of tornadoes or in the case of disease, and do that. And they're just not very, they're not very big in a funding sense. proposals. And so these are not multi-million-dollar proposals. They're more in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I see. And my last question, a government accountability report from 2016 that details agency expenditures on harmful algal blooms shows that the NSF was, at the time, the agency with the second highest algal bloom expenditures. I know the report's a little outdated at this juncture, but can you elaborate on some of the things the National Science Foundation has been doing to address the environmental, economic, and health impacts of harmful algal blooms, particularly red tide?
I don't know the details on the programs. We can get you that information. I know that we definitely have programs within the Geosciences Directorate in the Ocean Sciences and specifically, and also in the Arctic program to address algal blooms. And we can get you a list of the programs that we've funded there, but they're very, very much of concern to the agency. We do fund those programs.
And I misspoke. Finally, do you think that the proposed budget going forward that we're looking at today is sufficient for what your mission is?
In any given year, just based on our merit reviews of the rankings of proposals, we leave about $4 billion on the cutting room floor. That is proposals that are rated very good to excellent. About $2 billion of those proposals are rated above the average rating of the proposals that are funded. In a recent call for mid-scale proposals, we received about 400 proposals, which totaled $4.7 billion worth of funding. So there is great need out there. Whatever our budget is, we will fund the very best possible research using our merit review process.
So do you believe it's sufficient or not? I'm not trying to be difficult.
I think that the capacity of this country to do amazing research is just tremendous. And all I can say is that we will try to meet the needs for doing great research, the needs of the country, and the curiosity and the imagination of our proposers with whatever funding Congress gives us. And thank you very much for our FY19 budget, also, which gave us, or is giving us great capacity to fund excellent research.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Doctor. You're obviously very passionate about the National Science Foundation, as are many of us, a national institution, and I appreciate your own personal passion and work, but you are here representing our president and our administration in presenting really his overall budget priorities, and that's what we're after here is priorities. And you know, I read your testimony, I listen to your words, and it all sounds incredibly good. I look at your testimony, and you talk about the importance of National Science Foundation, the critical importance of basic research across the world, the contributions not only to science but to the economy. And I read through your specific programs, the survey telescopes, the big ideas. I agree with all of it. I appreciate, in particular, the advancement of the Daniel K. Inouye Solar Telescope. And then I get to the one catch line, which is that NSF's FY 2020 budget request is 9.6 below FY18, 12.6 below FY19. And I ask the basic question which Mr. Cartwright asked and which Mr. Chris just asked, what's going on? Budgets reflect priorities. The inescapable conclusion that I come to when I read the testimony and listen to your answers is that NSF in general is not prioritized within this president and this administration's budget. I cannot explain a reduction of over 10% over last fiscal year when you have thanked this committee a couple of times already for the increase in funding in FY19 and of course a 10% increase, and then Mr. Cartwright's observation that we're now back to FY12 levels. I just ask you the basic question, what am I to make of that? I look at your budget splits, I see reductions of almost 10% in your basic programs, and then I do see, of course, an increase for major research equipment and facilities construction of almost 20%. I'm not sure if that's related to your big ideas. I'm wondering whether what's actually going on is you've shifted from kind of a broader, more inclusive research prioritization to really focusing in on a few to the exclusion of many.
We fund science and engineering across all disciplines, everything except for biomedical science. And we, all of our directorates are, when the budget goes up, they equally, or they all take part in it, and when it goes down, they everything is decreased. We believe that all of the disciplines, that's what our whole convergence theme is about, need to work together to address major challenges. And in order to do that, we need to fund all aspects of science and engineering, because we never know where the next breakthrough is going to come from. And so the 10 big ideas specifically, well, 6 of them are research ideas and 4 are enabling ideas, like convergence and all disciplines coming together, like inclusion and broadening participation. They are a strategic framework to look ahead and say where the country is going, and they are very, very broad. They came out of the core, and they will go back into it once they're funded for a few years. And new strategic thrusts will emerge. But I hope sincerely that we are funding all areas of science and engineering, because they're all very, very important for our mission.
Was there a direction to National Science Foundation to cut 10% and find out how to cut it? Or was there a more educated process to decide within each of your departments as to the prioritization there? I'm looking, for example, at biological science, 9.7% cut. Computer information science and engineering, 8.1%. Basic engineering, 13.3% reduction. Math and physical science, 16.5%. Social behavioral and economic science, 5.6%. Polar programs, 19.6%. I mean, these are all reductions. They're all in some range. How were those reductions made? I mean, was this a bottom-up assessment of national science priorities, or was this a top-down direction to simply reduce the budget?
Well, first of all, the president's budget is a 5% reduction that's below the FY19 request in non-defense spending in order to shrink the deficit from nearly 5% of GDP in 2020 to under 1% of GDP in 2029. And the president's budget reflects that steps we take today to reduce the deficit will help the nation remain globally competitive and allow our children and grandchildren to remain unencumbered by today's spending. So that's the overall framework for the 5%. And beyond that, if you're asking for details, we at the National Science Foundation all work, when we have a target that we're working for, we work very closely together. It's both a bottoms-up and a top-down process where we decide what it is that are priorities of Congress, priorities of the administration, and priorities of the scientific community through input like all the reports, studies of the National Academy of Sciences and our advisory committees. We put all of that together and we come out with a budget that reflects where we think we need to go. Did
you have a budget cut directive? Back to my question, did you have a budget cut directive to get to 10%, or was there a more deliberate, thoughtful, generating bottom-up process that assessed that, for example, in the area of biological sciences, we needed to cut by almost 10% in that department to arrive at some kind of a merit-based assessment?
I think, as I said, Congressman, the overall framework is the President's initiative to get us back on course with a big deficit that our country is facing. And that requires some pulling back on the funding that we have in non-defense spending. And within that framework, we made very conscious decisions about what to do internally. And I think if you look across the various directorates and you compare them with things that we did in the last couple of years, because the budgets, for example, in FY18, we got the money late enough, an extra $300 million, that we gave it towards one-time funding of especially facilities that were in great need of repair. Arecibo and others are included in that. And then so that pushed up certain units in FY18, and then once they had spent that one-time funding, then we then had that money to apply across the board in FY19. And so there are little puts and takes as we go along because of one-time needs. But in setting the 2020 budget, we had this overall framework of minus 5% below the 2019 cap level. And then we went about making conscious decisions about where to take that from. I think you'll find that those the puts and takes are very fairly done within that framework.
Well, they're distributed fairly evenly, I'll give you that, but still, it's a big cut overall, and that's what I'm trying to get at, is what kind of prioritization am I supposed to make of that, not only within the scientific community, but kind of across the federal budget? And I understand you're not going to speak to the rest of the federal budget, you're here to talk about National Science Foundation, but again, I'm asking you what is actually going on under the surface of this president's budget in the area of scientific research, which we all agree is critical to this country.
I think, so this is the president's budget. I think you can see that there are priorities of the administration that are right in sync with NSF priorities in artificial intelligence, quantum research, wireless communications, advanced manufacturing and all. So we do have the priorities of the administration in our budget.
Okay, thank you very much.
Director Cordova, your budget request includes a request for $98 million in funding to continue work on the modernization of the McMurdo facility in Antarctica. Could you briefly walk us through this project?
Yes. So
You know, when we're talking about Antarctica, I was telling staff I get very nervous about asking you to walk us through it just in case it's melting, you know, so.
Oh, well,
I missed that whole of myself.
So the Ames project really started conceptually with the Blue Ribbon panel that was conducted several years ago now, led by Norm Augustine, in which a panel of very distinguished scientists, engineers, evaluated the situation at the McMurdo station, which is one of 3 stations that comprise the U.S. Antarctica program and that NSF runs on behalf of the country. And McMurdo is the first station that you arrive at there on the continental coast. And it is by far the largest station, and it's an important depot for logistics to the South Pole and logistics to all the camps where research is done around the McMurdo area. It is a very aging facility. It is something like 40, 50 years old, and it looks like an old mining town that's been left unattended for decades. I first went there in 1996 when I was NASA's chief scientist as part of the team to evaluate the conditions at the South Pole Station. As a consequence of the Senate look at that and Congress's look at that, the South Pole Station was refurbished, but not McMurdo. And so McMurdo in the intervening years has just become more and more in need of refurbishment. So the Ames project was our attempt to come up with a modernization for science program. It stands for Antarctica Infrastructure Modernization for Science, to address this. And it is a very ambitious safety. It will address logistics. It will get rid of a lot of old crumbling buildings there and put things together in a much more streamlined, efficient plan in order to be able to handle logistics in a better, cheaper, faster way eventually, but not without an initial cost in order to pay for it. So that cost has just been determined by a design review. A final design review was just completed a few months ago and presented to our National Science Board in February of this year, and they approved that cost, which is about $410 million, and it's starting right away. We're already doing procurements for the ships that will then take all the supplies down there on the next season, which starts in October.
You know, this question comes to mind. It's not a prepared question. So we're there doing some work, research, and so on now. What other countries are in that continent?
There are many, many other countries that are there, and you can see the flags flying of more than a dozen, maybe close up to 24 nations. I don't even know. Last time I counted the flags, there were 17, but there may be more now of nations that are involved in Antarctica. Yeah.
Thank you. As I understand it, due to the harsh weather and remote location, there are only certain times of the year this work can be done. How will the timing of appropriations impact the completion of the project?
The
You know, we tend not to always be on time. you know.
Yes. Well, we kind of figured that out a few years ago when we had a shutdown that started on October 1st, and I think in 2013. And so we now, for Antarctica operations in general, we forward fund the operations so that we don't get stuck with people and equipment and everything during the crucial season, which goes from October to February. For this project, we're fine for starting out for the coming year because the board did approve it, and we have the funds. Thank you again for FY19 funds to do the procurements. And so by the time the icebreaker goes and breaks the ice and the supply ships follow it to McMurdo, that we'll have it all ready. But in general, your question is a very good one, that appropriations are important on time so that we can make the procurements. Because once you miss a year, you've missed, once you miss that deadline of when the icebreaker comes and breaks the ice there in, I think it's early October, so then you've lost the entire season.
You know, I may be the only member of Congress who ever so often makes it sound like gridlock does not bother me, because gridlock is a result of democracy. There are countries where the budget is always on time, you know, because there's only a couple of people making the decision. And here we have a lot of people making the decision. Your budget request includes $75 million for a new mid-scale infrastructure program, which would invest in research facilities smaller than a telescope, for example, but larger than what can be funded within existing programs. Can you give us some examples of what sort of projects these would be?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, we got a few hundred proposals in for our first mid-scale launch, and those just recently arrived, and they total about $4.7 billion in requests. I can't talk about those specific proposals, of course, because they're being evaluated, but I can give you several examples of projects that we are doing that are within that frame of a few $1 million to about $70 million or $100 million. So one is Advanced LIGO Plus. Advanced LIGO Plus was financed because of the augmentation we got in FY18. And so we funded it over 18 and continuing into 19, and that project is within that budgetary amount. And that is going to open up a huge volume of the universe to be able to detect gravitational waves. We have funded upgrades to the Alvin submersible vehicle to study our oceans. That is also in the same monetary framework. We funded improvements to NHERI, which it's earthquake research that has a shake table that needed refurbishment. We funded a refurbishment to the Palmer Pier in Antarctica. Palmer's one of our 3 stations there that desperately needed funding, and that was also in that that same money framework. And then finally, the 2 detectors for the Large Hadron Collider, which are done together under MREFC. If we had funded them individually, each one is our upgrade is $75 million contribution, so that would have fit within that area. So you can see then from geoscience to engineering to math and physical sciences, they all have very important projects that can be done as mid-scale projects. There's just tremendous demand out there. And as technology improves, there are more and more projects that are going to be costing less money. I guess I could mention computer and information science and their recent $60 million for the Frontera computer, a supercomputer, high-performance supercomputer at the University of Texas, Austin. That's also in that framework. So it doesn't matter what discipline you're in, there's a lot of important projects that can be done.
In September 2018, this is my last question, NSF released its new policy on dealing with sexual harassment by foundation grantees, including the possibility of terminating grant funding because of harassment. Is it your sense that the policy is working, and how many complaints have you received?
It is our sense that the policy is working for a couple of reasons. One is just we've gotten tremendous feedback from the community over how important this is, and it will hold institutions accountable for the conduct of researchers. And so that in itself makes people feel more empowered in the work and the research they're doing. It was a real eye-opener to see how devastating harassment can be even within the science and engineering communities. We have gotten, universities are being very responsive and calling us at the first inkling that something is amiss, just to get our advice, even as they're proceeding with their own inquiries and investigations. We have teams that go out, as you probably know, for a long time and have checked on Title IX compliance, and so those teams are continuing to be out there. But I think as far as your question is concerned on how many, that's a question that is changing, as you can imagine, as we proceed, and I'd have to ask our Office of Diversity and Inclusion to get back to you with specific numbers. You have to realize that we actually put this into force as of the end of October. I think it was October 26th of this past year. So there's been relatively little time and we had to shut down in the middle of that for universities, for things to happen since that time. So we can also expect that we really need to evaluate any rise in the number of such instances over the next couple of years. That will be the important marker here.
Have any investigators had their grant funding withdrawn?
Under this program that we just started, this new term and condition as of late October, not to my knowledge, but again, our people that are doing that would have to get back to you. We are notified, and we have been for a long time, when investigators commit a transgression, and we have been on top of it and looked into it before this using our Title IX wherewithal, and their universities have removed investigators, and then when the research is implicated, when they have NSF funding, then we work with the universities to see if that research should continue or not with a different principal investigator or whatever, to make accommodations for the research itself without the investigators. But it's really, in the end, it's up to the institutions to do something. And then right now, they are required to report to us when they have done something, so that we don't get the information secondhand as we had previously. But there have been people that have been removed from research by the universities in the past.
Thank you. Ms. Satterwhite.
Thank you. Let me follow up with the Ames project that you talked about a little earlier. Of course, the budget request includes $98 million to continue the construction, and I understand the project is now, as you mentioned, $410 million. Why have the cost estimates increased?
So, as I mentioned, we just finished with the final design review and the independent cost estimate, and both of those came out together at the number that we proposed to the National Science Board for their approval of $410 million. So those were the numbers after very good studies were done. They are, that is an increase from original back in the first days of conceiving the project. Those are increased for a couple of reasons. One is because commodities price markets have just changed, and things are more expensive now than they were in the past. And also, we've had the whole construction industry in this country has changed because of natural disasters like hurricanes, and so that's changed the market as well. So assessing all those factors is why we have a design review and why we have independent cost estimates, to get a really good number. So we will be held to that number as far as our no-cost overrun policy is concerned.
So as it proceeds over the coming years, you don't expect there will be additional costs at this point?
We hope that our cost estimates are very good ones. There are always what we call unknown unknowns, things that you couldn't even imagine that would happen, and then we'll have to deal with that. But that would apply not just to Ames, that would apply to any facility that we have anywhere. So.
Of course, as you know, tornadoes are a real concern in my home state of Alabama, and of course, other states in the southeast as well. We've had a lot of destructive, deadly tornadoes over the years. Just earlier this month, we had 23 people that lost their lives when an EF4 tornado tore through the eastern part of the state. And that's why research that Vortex Southeast are so important. It brings the federal agencies together to help to better understand how environmental factors affect tornadoes, the formation of them, their intensity, and of course their paths. Can you talk about the NSF role in the Vortex Southeast and how NSF has worked with NOAA to build a research campaign to study the unique characteristics of tornadoes there in the Southeast?
First of all, Congressman Adderholt, our hearts go out from the National Science Foundation to those whose lives were lost or disrupted by those tornadoes. And unfortunately, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods are things that we've had to live with. And our goal at NSF is to do the research that is needed to better predict those kinds of things and what their consequences could be, to help people to get out of harm's way and to also help with recovery. So prediction and resilience and recovery are what we fund our research about. Now, with NOAA, we do have a collaboration on the Vortex program. As you know, it's run out of NOAA's National Severe Storms Laboratory in Oklahoma, and that began with a workshop in 2015 in Huntsville, Alabama. And that field work is ongoing and was in effect when those deadly tornadoes struck earlier this month. NSF has contributed a lot to tornado research. I mentioned in my oral remarks on opening about the development of mobile Doppler radar. Kelvin Drogemeyer, the new director of OSTP and a former vice chairman of the National Science Board, which is the policy arm of the National Science Foundation, is a tornado researcher. And we have funded a couple of the centers that he's headed up on this tornado research. So we stand ready to work with our partners at NOAA and NSSL to support scientists to conduct this vitally important research.
Does, how would NOAA's proposal, as I understand it, to terminate funding for the Vortex Southeast in FY 2020 impact your work at NSF?
As I said, we're committed to this research, and that project has been a particularly good one. We will continue to fund through our Prevents program in engineering and geosciences. We will continue to be funding the research that I mentioned on prediction and resilience and prevention. I don't know the details of NOAA's budget, of course, but our commitment is to do this important research.
And I know earlier there was a question about artificial intelligence, and you talked about that in your comments, and I think answered the question. Just to follow up on that, in your opinion, is the United States, do you think it's falling behind competitors such as China when it comes to funding artificial intelligence research and other emerging technologies?
I don't. We still have, we continue to have very high standing among the top organizations and research institutions, universities that are doing this kind of research. We still are in the, whatever number you take, top 20, top 10, we still have the leading groups in this country that are doing that research. We have a tremendous amount of talent and innovation out there. We have a great plan. The White House in 2016 produced an artificial intelligence strategic plan that's being evaluated by the present administration. We have a select committee on artificial intelligence that I co-chair with the head of DARPA to work with all the agencies to put us ahead in artificial intelligence. And very importantly, we have a remarkable industry that surrounds, that is involved, engaged with artificial intelligence, and that is a very creative force. And that industry working together with the government and with nonprofits just can do amazing things. We have meetings continually with industry in the White House and with all the other agencies on where we need to be leading in artificial intelligence. And it just NSF alone, I estimate by counting across all directorates, is spending something like $492 million on artificial intelligence, even within this budget. So, and that's really counting broadly over all the things we do in computer science and with high performance computers to enable artificial intelligence. But it's all relevant because artificial intelligence is really a collection of things, a collection of approaches. The basic research that we are doing on artificial intelligence, I think, is going to be the real game changer. There's a lot of innovation in very selected areas of artificial intelligence that are coming out of industry and will continue to come out of industry. But if you think of something like the internet or the World Wide Web, those came from government funding. And I believe that the real innovation that's going to come in artificial intelligence is also going to come from government funding, and it's going to start with basic research.
Are you collaborating with international partners and doing to advance the research in regarding artificial intelligence?
We are collaborating with selected our international partners. Yes, there's, as you know, a huge hunger to do all aspects of artificial intelligence, and countries in Europe and Great Britain are among them, and we do work. We fund investigators, and they fund their own investigators, and they do partnerships together. You know, much of the research that is produced, and many of the majority of publications have international teams of authors, and we've gained so much from other countries by working with their best people, their most talented people, and I think that is definitely the wave of the present and the future.
Thank you. I yield back.
Just mention that we will have additional questions for the record.
Of course.
I want to thank you for your testimony today. I want to thank you for your advocacy on behalf of your agency. We are very supportive of NSF, and we will continue to be as the project process develops. So thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you, Chairman Serrano,
Thank you.
Ranking Member Adderholt. Thank you.
And the hearing is adjourned.